In Bloodborne, the Great Ones are not just huge monsters lurking in the dark. They are cosmic beings whose presence reshapes belief, perception, and even the rules of reality. That is why they matter. Once they enter the story, religion, science, and madness start to blur together, and Yharnam stops making sense in ordinary terms. The core tension in the lore is simple. The Great Ones are often described like gods, but they are also treated as living beings with their own limits and influence. Some are worshipped, some are studied, and some are feared. What makes them disturbing is that they do not merely stand above humanity. They work through dreams, blood, and contact, changing people from within through things they were never meant to understand. Yharnam did not begin as a city of monsters. It began as a place that believed it had found a cure. The healing church built its authority around blood ministration, a practice that promised recovery, strength, and relief from suffering. To most people, it looked like advanced medicine. In reality, it reached far beyond ordinary healing. The church had uncovered something linked to the labyrinths beneath the city, and that discovery pointed to a deeper source, the old blood, connected in some way to the Great Ones, even if few understood that at first. This is where Bloodborne's horror starts to take shape. The city's leaders did not see the old blood as a warning. They saw it as progress. It worked, at least at first. People were healed. The church gained power. Faith and medicine began to merge. But the more Yharnam depended on the blood, the more it drew from the same corruption that made the cure possible in the first place. What looked like a breakthrough became a habit, and what looked like salvation became dependence. The old blood matters because it marks the first point where human ambition reaches toward the Great Ones without understanding the cost. The scholars and clergy around Yharnam were not chasing superstition. They wanted healing, knowledge, and access to something greater. Byrgenwerth had already begun that search by studying the ruins below the surface and the traces of a lost higher civilization. The healing church inherited that obsession and gave it structure. Once the blood entered the city, it stopped being only a relic or a research subject. It became part of everyday life, and that made the Great Ones part of human society as well. That is what makes Yharnam so dangerous in the lore. It is not simply cursed from above, it is trapped in the consequences of its own choices. Blood ministration was treated as a miracle because it produced visible results, but those results came from a source tied to beings that do not fit human understanding. The church then built an entire belief system around that power, which only made the problem worse. Once the blood was accepted as holy, every new use of it carried the same hidden risk. The closer people came to the source, the less control they kept over what followed. That is why the Great Ones cannot be separated from the old blood. Even before the hunt begins, the city has already been shaped by contact with them. The church's authority, Yharnam's reliance on blood ministration, and the spread of the plague all point back to the same basic truth. Humans found something beyond their reach, wrapped it in medicine and religion, and built a civilization around it. So before the Great Ones are explained as beings, they are already present as an influence. They are the reason the healing system exists, the reason the church rises, and the reason a medical miracle becomes a spiritual disaster. The old blood is not just a tool, it is the first sign that Yharnam has touched something that can alter biology, belief, and identity at the same time. From here, the real question is not whether the city contacted something dangerous, it is what kind of entities were waiting on the other side. To understand the Great Ones, start by separating them from Bloodborne's other monsters. They are not simply stronger beasts, and they are not easy fantasy gods either. The game presents them as beings on a scale human minds were never meant to handle. Some are known only through dreams, rituals, or the effects they leave behind. Others appear in brief, disturbing forms, as if the human world can barely register their existence. That difference matters, because Bloodborne is full of horrors, but not all horrors mean the same thing. Ordinary beasts come from the scourge and the corruption of blood. They are tragic in a human way, because they were once people. The Great Ones are something else entirely. They sit much closer to the source of the crisis. They are tied to the higher planes that Byrgenwerth and later institutions tried to reach. They are not dead gods or simple alien invaders. They are beings with their own existence, their own desires, and their own relationship to humanity, none of which people truly understand. That is why insight changes so much. Gaining insight is not just learning facts, it changes what the world can reveal. The more a person sees, the more they notice layers that were always there but hidden from them before. That does not make the Great Ones easier to understand. It only thins the veil enough for their presence to become clearer. People begin to notice what was always nearby, and that knowledge often brings fear, instability, or collapse. Insight does not shrink the Great Ones, it makes the observer less certain that reality is stable at all. That uncertainty is part of what drove the scholars around Byrgenwerth. They did not simply discover the Great Ones and worship them. They saw a path beyond human limits. Willem's school treated knowledge as a way forward, but that path split quickly. One side believed understanding would come through restraint and observation. The other wanted direct communion, and later institutions pushed even further, trying to force contact through blood, ritual, and transformation. The same mistake kept repeating. People assumed the Great Ones were powerful beings that could be studied, copied, or used. Bloodborne makes it clear that this is exactly what leads to ruin. The Great Ones also resist simple moral labels. They are not all interested in the same things, and they are not all shown acting with open malice. Some seem distant, some seem drawn to surrogate children, some are linked to dreams, moons, and unseen realms. That variety matters because it keeps them from becoming a single, easy evil. They are not one faction with one plan. They are a category of beings whose motives stay opaque and whose contact with humans is often filtered through human need, grief, and desire. People want healing, they want transcendence, they want contact with something greater. The Great Ones become the shape those desires take when they reach beyond the human world. That is also why Bloodborne's horror works so well. The Great Ones are not just hidden bosses waiting at the end of a difficult game. They are the reason the world's central institutions unravel. The Church does not merely get corrupted by monsters, it builds itself around a power it cannot contain. The scholars do not merely make a bad discovery. They reach for a truth that breaks their minds. Even the language around the Great Ones reflects that distance. Humans keep trying to define them through religion, medicine, and science, but none of those systems can fully hold what they are looking at. So when Bloodborne talks about the Great Ones, it is talking about entities beyond ordinary humanity in both power and meaning. They are tied to higher planes, to hidden perception, and to the dangerous pull of wanting more than human life can offer. That makes them more than the scariest creatures in the world. It makes them the reason the world's rules begin to fail. And once that becomes clear, the next question is not why people fear them. It is why so many kept trying to reach them anyway. That is the pattern running through Bloodborne's history. People do not just run into the Great Ones by accident, they seek them out. Byrgenwerth is where that search becomes serious. The scholars there uncover traces of a truth buried beneath the world, and instead of stopping when it turns dangerous, they keep going. Their work leads to the discovery of the old blood, and it also creates the first major split in the story. One path favors restraint and understanding, while the other treats the blood as a tool. That split matters because it sets the model for everything that follows. Bloodborne's horror is not built on one unlucky mistake. It is built on a chain of choices made by people who keep choosing pursuit over caution. Out of that split comes the healing church. What starts as blood ministration for the people of Yharnam quickly becomes something larger than medicine. It becomes doctrine. The blood is not only used to treat illness or injury, it is treated as sacred, as proof of divine contact. That is where the church becomes dangerous. Once blood is worshipped, every apparent success makes the practice feel justified, and every warning can be dismissed as fear or blasphemy. The church turns contact with the Great Ones into an institution, so the problem is no longer one scholar's obsession. It becomes a citywide system built around faith in a power nobody truly understands. The more the blood seems to work, the harder it is to ask what it is doing underneath the surface. The school of Mensis pushes that idea even further. Where Byrgenwerth studies, Mensis reaches. Its scholars are not satisfied with observing traces of cosmic truth. They want direct communion. They want access, revelation, transformation. In Bloodborne, that desire usually leads to disaster. Mensis uses ritual, sacrifice, and experimentation to force a connection with something beyond human limits, and the result is not enlightenment in any clean sense. It is madness, nightmare, and a wider gap between human intention and cosmic reality. They are trying to become something higher, but they are doing it from a position of ignorance, which is exactly what makes the attempt so disturbing. They do not understand the terms of contact, only the promise of what contact might unlock. This is why the Great Ones are so often tied to Ascension, but never in a simple or triumphant way. Human beings in Bloodborne assume that more knowledge will lead to a better state of being, more insight, more understanding, more closeness to the truth. But the Great Ones do not behave like gods in the human sense, and they do not reward devotion in any predictable way. They respond to desire, loss, need, and pressure in ways that feel deeply alien. People try to reach them through prayer, ritual, and science because those are the only tools they have, but none of those tools are enough to bridge the divide safely. Even when a Great One's influence produces something that looks miraculous, it rarely matches what people hope to find. That divide is also why so many of the churches and Mensis' experiments end in failed imitation rather than true ascension. The people involved do not just want to meet the Great Ones, they want to copy what they think the Great Ones are. They study blood, birth, and transformation because they believe divinity can be manufactured. But every time they try to force that process, the result is incomplete. Bodies warp, minds break. Children are used as vessels or evidence of the next step. The institutions do not produce a perfected human state. They produce unstable creatures and systems built on a misunderstanding of what the Great Ones actually are. The closest they come to success is often the most tragic outcome of all, because even then the result is not mastery. It is dependence, mutation, or loss. The Great Ones are not just powerful beings at the end of the lore. They are the reason the lore keeps unfolding at all. Byrgenwerth opens the first door. The healing church turns that door into a public path. Mensis tries to force it open wider in the hope of getting an answer. Every one of those efforts comes from ambition, and every one of them makes the problem worse. By the time the player reaches Yharnam, the gate has already been pushed far beyond what any human institution can control. Human ambition is not a side effect of the Great One's presence. It is the engine that keeps inviting them back in. The cost of that pursuit is not simply learning too much. It is that knowledge changes what people are capable of becoming, and in Bloodborne that change is rarely harmless. Insight is the clearest example. It begins as a measure of understanding, but it also makes the world harder to endure. The more someone sees past the surface, the less stable their grasp on reality becomes. Things that once looked ordinary start to shift. Hidden forms come into view. Truth does not just reveal more of the world, it starts to press back. That is why so much of Bloodborne's horror is tied to transformation. The beasts are not random accidents. They are the visible result of human beings trying to reach for something higher through blood. The healing church presents blood ministration as a cure, but the cure carries corruption with it. Instead of producing clarity or elevation, it leaves people unstable, feral, or emptied out. That is part of the tragedy of Yharnam. The church builds its authority on the promise that old blood can save lives, while everything around it shows that the same blood is destroying them. The nightmare layer of the setting makes the same point in a different way. Byrgenwerth's research, the church's experiments, and Mensis' rituals all move toward contact with realities that behave like dreams but still have real consequences. The nightmare is not just a symbol for guilt or insanity. It is where forbidden knowledge becomes permanent. People are pulled into it, changed by it, and trapped there because they tried to force contact with something beyond them. The result is not mastery, it is captivity. That is also why the use of children matters so much. Bloodborne does not treat that cruelty as incidental. It fits the logic of the world's institutions. If the Great Ones are bound up with loss, longing, and failed reproduction, then the people studying them begin to treat children as substitutes, vessels, or signs that the next step can be forced. Murgo is the clearest example of that thinking. The rituals around infant Great Ones are not reverent in any real sense. They are attempts to turn innocence and vulnerability into a path toward transcendence. Instead, they produce grief, distortion, and more nightmare logic. That pattern runs through the major factions. Byrgenwerth starts with curiosity and turns it into discovery without responsibility. The healing church turns that discovery into doctrine and spreads it through treatment, ritual, and hierarchy. Mensis pushes past caution and tries to manufacture contact through obsession. None of them are simple villains. They are driven by the same desire to understand the Great Ones and make use of that power. But because they misunderstand what the Great Ones are, every step they take becomes a form of self-destruction. The institutions collapse not because the truth is too abstract, but because the truth keeps breaking the people who try to control it. That is the real consequence of cosmic knowledge in Bloodborne. It does not stay in the mind. It reshapes institutions, bodies, families, and entire cities. It turns medicine into contamination and religion into a machine for damage. By the time the hunt reaches its height, the horror is no longer something at the edge of comprehension. It has already entered the bloodstream, warped the world, and left people paying for answers they never learned how to survive. Even the strongest figures are not spared. Gehrman, Maria, Lawrence, and the others tied to the old experiments all show the same pattern. Closeness to higher truth does not guarantee wisdom. More often, it leads to dependence, obsession, or regret. Some try to flee what they have learned, others try to preserve it through rituals, laboratories, or forbidden records, but none of those responses erase the damage. In Bloodborne, knowledge is never neutral. Once it is gained, it creates obligations, injuries, and consequences that outlast the discovery itself. For the player, the Great Ones are not just the hidden cause of Yharnam's collapse. They are the reason the hunt exists at all. Bloodborne keeps returning to the same pattern. People reach upward, catch only a fragment of something far beyond them, and then suffer for mistaking that fragment for control. The hunter steps into that system late, but never outside it. By the time the game begins, the hunt is already running on the consequences of contact with the Great Ones, and the player enters a city where cure, faith, and cosmic violation have already been mixed together. That matters because the Great Ones are not treated as distant lore. Their presence shapes the rules of the world the player moves through. The moon, the dream, the nightmares, the transformations, the blood, and the hidden details that appear as insight rises all point to the same truth. These are not simple gods or large monsters. They are beings so removed from ordinary life that even understanding them changes the observer. In Bloodborne, knowledge is not neutral. Seeing more makes you more exposed to what is being seen. As insight increases, things that were hidden begin to enter the player's reality. What was invisible becomes undeniable, and that shift is one of the clearest signs that the Great Ones alter perception itself. That is why the hunt keeps growing stranger the farther it goes. At first, it looks like a battle against beasts and a decaying city. Then it becomes clear that the beasts are only one result of a larger failure. The old blood created a false miracle, but it was never truly under human control. It was tied to the Great Ones, and the people who built their power around it never understood the terms they accepted. Yharnam's healing church, its scholars, and the people who sought advancement through blood all tried to use contact with something higher, as if it were a tool. Instead, that contact reshaped bodies, minds, and institutions around it. The hunter keeps exposing that mistake. The city cannot explain what it has awakened, so it answers with denial, secrecy, and ritual. Those responses only make the disaster worse, because they still assume the Great Ones can be managed like a human project. The moon presence sits at the center of that late-game revelation. It is not framed like a normal final enemy, and that is the point. It is one of the Great Ones, but it is also tied to the hunter's dream, and to Yharnam's trapped role within it. By then the player understands that the hunt is not just a local outbreak or a civic emergency. It is part of a structure built around Great One influence, survival after contact, and desperate attempts to contain powers no one fully understands. The dream gives the hunter the strength to continue, but it also shows the cost of being held inside a system shaped by something beyond human scale. Yharnam makes that especially clear, because he is not only a guide or mentor, he is part of the machinery of the hunt itself, bound to a space that exists because a bargain was made with forces that do not fit ordinary reality. Bloodborne's endings make that cost impossible to ignore. If the player accepts release, the cycle ends in resignation. If the player resists, the hunt continues under the same hidden pressure that has already ruined Yharnam. And if the player goes further, consuming the umbilical cords and forcing a deeper confrontation with the truth, the story shifts again. That path suggests that moving closer to the Great Ones may open a different kind of existence, but not a safe one, and not a human one in any ordinary sense. The game never presents that as a clean triumph. It is closer to a terrible transformation than a victory, a sign that understanding the Great Ones and becoming like them are not the same thing as remaining intact. The player may escape one version of the system, but the price is a rebirth into something unknown, which fits the game's larger logic. Contact with the Great Ones always changes what it means to survive. That is the core tragedy Bloodborne keeps returning to. The Great Ones are not evil in any simple sense, and they are not waiting to punish humanity out of malice. They are beyond the scale that would make that kind of motive easy to assign. The real damage comes from the gap between what they are and what people want from them. Humans want healing, status, knowledge, evolution, answers, and a place in the cosmic order. The Great Ones become the object of all those desires, and every attempt to reach them proves that the cost of contact is higher than the cultures around Yharnam can survive. Even the most organized human efforts in the setting circle the same mistake, treating a force that should inspire humility as if it were a resource waiting to be harvested. So by the time the player reaches the end, the Great Ones are no longer just the secret behind the setting. They are the measure of the whole story. The hunt exists because human beings touched something they could not understand. The city fell because that touch was turned into medicine, doctrine, and obsession. And the player's path through Bloodborne makes the same point in another form. The closer you get to cosmic truth, the less room there is for ordinary human life to remain the same. That is why the Great Ones matter so much to Bloodborne. They are not just rare cosmic beings above this setting, they are the hidden center of it. Their presence turns medicine into contamination, faith into obsession, and discovery into collapse. Yharnam falls not because people looked upward, but because they tried to drag the heavens down to human scale. Bloodborne's horror works because the Great Ones stay just beyond full understanding, yet close enough to shape every disaster below. Their distance makes them unknowable. Their influence makes them inescapable. The final cruelty is simple. What is reached for as salvation becomes the thing that destroys everything.